My mom chose my toxic stepsister over me and kicked me out. Now, I got engaged, and my fiancé's company dropped her husband. She blames me. I, 26F, have been engaged to my fiancé, whom we'll call Jeff, 26M, for approximately 2 months. I met him 4 years ago on a dating app, and we've been inseparable since. Jeff and I are soulmates. He is the only person in my life who has never disappointed me. I have not had an easy life. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old. My father abandoned us without looking back. He paid child support, but that was it. He never bothered to come and see how I was doing. To be honest, my mother, 48F, was not a terrific mother either. When I was younger, she was more focused on other activities than on raising me. I was basically reared by nannies and babysitters. When I was a little older, my mother was quite young, and her priorities were very different. She didn't care much about becoming a mother and spent most of her time with friends or on dates. She was an outgoing socialite who had no time for me. Even in terms of her career, she was not taking her work seriously. She was a freelance artist who made good money every month, but she didn't have to worry about me since she had child support checks coming in to cover everything. I hate to say it, but if it hadn't been for the child support, I'm very sure she would have kicked me out a long time ago. She was never very devoted to me, and I suspected she was waiting for me to mature so I could leave her alone. Then, when I was around 13, she began seeing my stepfather. My stepfather, Matt, 50 million, has a daughter around my age. We'll call my stepsister Jess. When they initially started dating and my mother brought his family home to introduce us, she advised me to be on my best behavior since this was very important to her. Now, Mom had brought home boyfriends dozens of times before, but she had never been concerned about how I behaved. She would generally just tell me that she had guests coming over, and I would use that as a cue to go into my room and stay until they went. But this time, I had the impression she was serious about the person, otherwise, she would not have been concerned about my actions. To put it another way, if she wasn't serious about Matt, she wouldn't have worried about my presence in the house at all. The first time I met him and his daughter, they were relatively kind to me, and it was a pleasant introduction. I had no idea what was going to happen to me following that initial meeting. Soon after, he began to visit more frequently, and it seemed as if they had almost moved in together. I didn't mind it. It wasn't bothering me in any way, so I had no need to worry about them as long as they allowed me to go on with my life. It remained that way for a long time. They were practically living together, and Jess would occasionally visit as well. Her mother was still a part of her life, therefore she spent half of each month at her mother's house. Initially, people were either polite to me or ignored me. I was fine with that because I didn't really care for any of them. I didn't really care about my mother, so it was tough for me to care about anyone related to her. All I wanted was my own peace and quiet, which I enjoyed for a while. But then they decided to make it a permanent relationship and move in together. Now, I wouldn't have cared, but my mother informed me that now that they were moving in together, I would have to start sharing my room with my stepsister. I refused to do that because it was my room. It had been my room my entire life, and it was the one thing that gave me calm. In that house, I had my own private area. I was not going to give up my freedom by sharing a room with someone I barely know. When I told my mother that I was not going to share my room, we had a heated quarrel. She threatened to kick me out of the house if I did not do what she asked. I was 14 years old at the time, and despite my youth, I was aware of the law. I felt compelled to since my mother was the type of person you couldn't truly trust. It's also plain basic logic, and I knew mother couldn't send me out until I was an adult, or she'd face legal consequences. So I informed her that I knew she couldn't do it and that she was faking. She was frustrated, but she had to let me have my room and chose to convert the basement into Jess's room. It wasn't a very horrible place to be. It wasn't as nice as my room, but my mother worked hard to make it more appealing and livable. By the time she was finished, it looked as good as any other room in the home, so I had no idea what the big issue was. But for some reason, that's when Jess started disliking me. It could have had something to do with the fact that on the day she moved in with us, my mother gave them a house tour and made it clear to everyone that Jess had to live in the basement since I wasn't ready to share my room. I didn't understand why she would make such an announcement, and I still can't think of a rationale. Perhaps she intended to make me feel bad by stating it in front of Jess, but all it did was make me feel strange and uncomfortable. It made me feel embarrassed for her, but I didn't feel bad about putting my foot down. Or perhaps she simply enjoyed drama and wanted Jess to know that I had refused to share my room with her, which would undoubtedly lead to difficulties between us. Jess did not appear to be the type of girl who would tolerate something like this. My mother was correct. Jessica refused to let it go. After that day, she began treating me as an adversary. She would still spend half of the month with her mother, but the days she would be living with us were excruciatingly difficult for me. She was a threat to society, and she had a personal vendetta against me. She was frequently nasty to me and made horrible statements about me right in front of my face. To give you an example of what she would say, she once told me that the reason my father left my mother was most likely because of me. Then she laughed, as if it were hilarious. She would make fun of my appearance because I was slightly fat at the time. She used to make fun of me at school for no apparent reason. Jess had a huge clique of mean females at school, and she would never miss a chance to bully me with her friends. Earlier, she and her pals would simply ignore me, which I loved. She and I were never friends, but that was vastly preferable to being her enemy. The saddest aspect was that I had done nothing to her. She was simply offended that I did not want to share my room with her. It was a ridiculous cause to hate me so much and try to ruin my life. My room was my safe area, and with a mother like mine, I don't think anyone can blame me for wanting my own space. Besides, if any of them had ever made an effort to get to know me, I could have shared my room with her. But she was a stranger to me, and I didn't feel comfortable giving up my independence for her. I never complained to my mother or Matt because they were aware of the situation and it was meaningless to do so. They didn't care. I might be bullied my entire life, and they would still turn a blind eye since I was not important to them. So I had to put up with it and let her trample all over me. I would fight back periodically, but I quickly realized that it only escalated the conflict. Our parents would intervene, and I would be grounded because they despised me. She would constantly cry a little to get out of trouble. But I couldn't cry on command like her, and I wasn't as manipulative. So I'd be the one who was punished for my poor behavior and advised to start treating Jess like a sister, while she got away with it and I had to face the consequences. It was a miserable place to grow up, and I despised my existence. So when I was finally kicked out around my 18th birthday, I was relieved more than anything else. I had put up with my family's crazy for years before being kicked out, and it only became worse over time. Jess continued to be a nightmare to deal with, and our parents continued to back her without questioning the legitimacy of her actions. In 4 years, she had managed to turn our whole high school year against me, and I had just a few friends who would even talk to me. Everyone else despised me because she did, and that was sufficient justification. It had taken a toll on my mental health, and I was battling to keep up in all areas. I had acquired a lot of weight from binge eating, and it had severely changed my appearance for the worst. I was overweight, acne-prone, and had pretty awful hair. I was also trying to maintain my grades. So not only did I look horrible, but I also appeared to be dumb to everyone else. I had nothing going for me and was at an all-time low. Things at home were no better, as I still had to deal with Jess and my parents. My mother had grown increasingly irritable and would continually compare me to Jess, despite the fact that she was the one who had made my life so much worse than it had been previously. Things were terrible before my mother married Matt and they moved in together, but not as horrible as they are now. Yeah, it was terrible that my mother didn't care about me before, but after her marriage to Matt, I went from the frying pan to the fire. She progressed from not caring to intentionally making me feel horrible about myself, and it felt as if I was also living with mean females at home. It was very clear to me that Jess was the daughter my mother had hoped for. Instead, life had dealt her the wrong hand, and she was stuck with me. I know they both wanted nothing more than for me to leave, and to be honest, I did too. My mother and Jess despised me, but Matt didn't care. I have no relatives to speak of other than my mother because my grandparents did not communicate with us. I had never known my father, and I knew nothing about my other grandparents. I actually had nowhere to go, and I felt awkward approaching my friends for assistance. So I had to fight it out and stay with my mother to ensure that I had a roof over my head and food to eat every day until I reached 18. But then, a few weeks before my birthday, an incident occurred, and I was expelled out the same day. It was a weekend, yet I remember it like it was yesterday since it was one of the most terrible and stressful days of my life. We had both recently graduated, and she had begun hanging out with a bigger circle of folks. She had a buddy whose brother was in his senior year of college, and she was dating her brother. So she and her friend would hang out with his pals, who were all older than us. I understood exactly what they were up to, but I didn't think it was worth bringing it up with my parents because, with my luck, it would only backfire. So I never told anyone that she'd started drinking. And, while I couldn't prove it, I knew she was smoking pot and whatnot. I was never interested in any of it because, first and foremost, I never had friends who were cool enough to have access to drink, cigarettes, or drugs. Second, I was already suffering with my weight and academics. I didn't need to add drink or drugs to the mix, I already had plenty on my plate. But that day, I believe I left my room unlocked before going for a shower. The next thing I knew I heard a banging on the bathroom door, and my mother was yelling at me, insisting that I come out right once. I had to rush and put on my clothes so I could see what she was talking about. When I got out of the shower, my mother, Matt, and Jess were waiting in my room, all with serious expressions on their faces. My mother took out a bunch of empty beer bottles from beneath my bed, and even more incriminating, there was a giant plastic baggie containing, I'm not sure how many grams of weed. My parents were unaware that it did not belong to me or Jess. I believe she had planted it in my room when I was not there and then informed my mother. They began flipping out and yelling at me about what a terrible person I was. She didn't just yell at me about the drink and drugs, she also started venting about how I was a complete disgrace to them. She protested that I ate all the food. She stated I was a waste. She was convinced that I would never do anything worthwhile in the future and would simply continue to live with them and spend their money. I attempted to explain multiple times that none of it belonged to me and that I had no idea how it ended up in my room, but she didn't believe me. She lost it when I suggested that Jess might have planted it in my room to get me in trouble. She began yelling at me about how I was always jealous of her and that I would never be as good as her at anything, which was why I was attempting to shift the blame. I was crying uncontrollably by that point, but she didn't seem to care and proceeded to rant at me. After some while, she stopped shouting at me and told me I needed to leave. I had no idea what she was talking about, so I asked her where I was heading. She told me she didn't care where I went, she just wanted me out of the house because she was tired of dealing with me. When I refused to go, she threatened to call the cops on me. She added that because I was almost 18, they would treat the drug allegations very seriously. She informed me she did not want an addict living with her and consuming all of her money and resources. I had to watch out for myself now since she was tired of pretending to be a happy family with someone who deserved nothing. I was pleading with her not to force me out because, while I wanted to leave, I knew I had nowhere to go and didn't have enough money on my own. But my mother didn't care. She informed me that if I didn't leave within that day, she would phone the police and report me herself. I was surprised that she could be so cruel, and even more so that neither Matt nor Jess complained about it. They were literally going about their day as if nothing was happening. After a lot of crying and begging, I finally started packing my belongings. I would gladly choose to live on the streets over being arrested for drug possession. I finished packing by the evening, and as I left the house, no one said goodbye, and I never looked back. I went to the park and sat on a seat for a few hours, but it got pretty cold. So I decided to go over to a friend's apartment and spend the night there, hoping they would let me. I went to my best friend Amy's house and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She already knew how my parents were, so I didn't need to explain much to her. When I told her about what had happened that day, she was horrified. She said her parents could help me if I allowed them. I'd always urged her not to tell anyone about how my parents treated me, including her parents, because I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me. I guess I felt awkward revealing these sensitive information about my life with others. But that day, she compelled me to inform her parents, who were as appalled as Amy was. They called my mother and attempted to speak with her, but it didn't help, and she was quite unpleasant to them. So they recognized that talking to her would not make things any better. Then they did something for which I am grateful beyond words. They promised me I could stay with them for as long as I needed to and that they would assist me. They were wealthy, so money was not an issue, and Amy adored me, so she was willing to share a room with me. I spent the following few years living with them and attending community college, which was the only place I could get accepted due to my poor grades. I began working and accumulating money to buy my own place, but Amy's parents made sure I never felt pressured to leave their home and made me as comfortable as they could. Then, roughly 3 years ago, I finally acquired enough money to move out. I was proud of myself, and I was also grateful to Amy and her parents. I honestly could not have done it without them. Even on the day I moved out, they were the ones who helped me settle into my new home and informed me that I was welcome to return whenever I wanted to visit or even live with them. That was the turning point in my life. By then, I'd shed a lot of weight and my health had improved significantly. I felt and looked better. I was also generating enough money to support myself and had put in enough effort to improve myself. So I decided to start dating as well because I wanted to marry someday and needed to start searching. I met a couple of guys before Jeff, but it usually fizzled out before it could get serious. After meeting Jeff, I fully understood why. It was because Jeff and I were intended to be together, whereas the other guys I met before him were only there to have fun. When we first started dating, I had no idea he was wealthy and the heir to his father's firm. I just liked him because he was humorous and cute, and he appeared to like me as well. After a few months of dating, he informed me about his family, and I understood they owned a restaurant chain, which he would inherit in a few years after his father retired. Many people may believe that learning how wealthy he was changed things for me, but I simply regarded him as the same person I had known before. That information made no difference to me. I still loved him as much as I did before. We moved in together after approximately a year of dating, and he had introduced me to his family a few months earlier. Everyone in his family liked me, and we got along great. Everything was absolutely perfect. So, when he recently asked if I wanted to marry him, I knew the answer right away. We've been engaged for 2 months now, and things are going great. But then, around 2 weeks ago, I got an email from Jess. We haven't spoken in almost 8 years, and I haven't heard from my family since I was kicked out. I had no idea why she would contact me now, especially to make amends. I believe enough time has passed, and neither of us cares enough to try to mend the problem anymore. So when I received that email and understood she was reaching out to me to apologize for all that had happened in the past and admit that she had been a complete nightmare, I was perplexed. She admitted to placing stuff in my room to get me tossed out since she disliked me for no reason. I had no understanding why she was revealing all of that so many years later, and I sensed something was wrong with the situation. The timing was further suspect because I had recently gotten engaged, and I knew she must have known about it. I had mentioned it on social media, and we attended the same high school, so someone must have told her about it. Everything felt odd, so I started to investigate. As a result, I discovered that the man Jess was married to also owned the company that supplied plastic containers and other items for takeaway orders to Jeff's restaurants. It was easy for me. All I had to do was create a phony profile and stalk her. From there, I went to her husband's profile, where he disclosed everything about his work in his bio, so it was a simple process. I already knew a lot about Jeff's business because we had planned to run it together after his father retired, so I was already learning the ropes. When I realized this was the individual he was dealing with, I immediately alerted Jeff. Now, over the past few years, I've done my best not to think about my previous life since I just wanted to go on. So I didn't follow anyone from my family online, and I told my friends not to tell me anything about them. I had no idea Jess was already married and had been for a few years. But when I discovered that her husband was actually interacting with us, Jeff and I decided to cancel our arrangement. It was already costing us a lot of money, and I don't think I'd ever do business with that woman again. Jeff also informed me that the quality of the things delivered by her husband had reduced significantly since the beginning. They were considering dropping him as a supplier anyhow and were in talks with another guy who offered lower prices and better products. So, last week, a few days after I received Jess's email, Jeff decided to meet with her husband and cancel their contract. But, for some reason, Jess believes I did this on purpose to get her back, and she has been accusing me of it in her emails and social media posts. We haven't spoken in about a decade, but she still believes I am carrying a grudge against her. Which I may be, but that is not the true reason her husband lost our contract. She posted a few days ago that many of her clients had already dropped them, and this was the final straw. But she maintains that I did it out of spite, and that this was really unprofessional of us. She tagged our Facebook page in her post, and things have gotten pretty ugly. I feel awful for her because, according to her message, she and her husband have been losing business left and right. Okay, I'll admit that some of this was personal, but much of it was business as well. I doubt Jeff and his father would have dropped her husband as a supplier based only on my word. Nevertheless, I feel awful for her. I'm not sure if I should have made my fiancé quit working with my estranged stepsister's husband. Update 1. Okay, so Jeff has spoken with his father's lawyers, and he believes we did the correct thing. So we're going after them legally and asking that they remove that message. We are also filing defamation charges against them because the guy charged us a bomb and delivered things that fell short of our expectations. If we could obtain a better offer somewhere else, we'd obviously go there. It's just a coincidence that Jess is married to the guy who runs that firm. Instead of improving their company's operations, she chose to trash us on social media. It's stupid that I allowed myself to feel horrible for her after everything she'd put me through. But you guys truly opened my eyes, so I appreciate that. Many of you have been quite supportive, which I appreciate. Thank you so much for your comments. Update 2. So Jeff and his father filed a slander claim against Jess and her husband a few days ago. We'll meet with a court-appointed mediator in a week, maybe. But in the meantime, my mother has taken it upon herself to protect her poor little stepdaughter yet again. It is so silly. I feel like I am back in high school. But, happily, I'm not back in high school, so I can simply disregard what they say. Unlike then, I don't need to be in my mother's books to get a roof over my head. So she may cry all she wants about it, but nothing will change. She has been attempting to contact me for the past few days, ever since Jess was served, but I have simply blocked her and gone on with my life. I don't need that type of negativity around me. I am engaged. I'm going to marry the guy of my dreams, and I don't need her or her insane stepdaughter back in my life. Update 3. Hey, so let me quickly fill you in. First, we won the defamation lawsuit. It wasn't even that difficult because my father-in-law's lawyers are absolute sharks, and they killed her and her husband. So, maybe they'll focus more on their business now and meet their clients' expectations. They had to pay for what they stated, and we were able to strike an agreement. So that's over, and we can finally devote all of our attention to preparing our wedding. It's quite thrilling, and I can't wait to get married to Jeff. As previously stated, he is my soulmate, and I have waited a long time to find someone like him. Now that I have him, I will never let go.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.